It is early November 2014, and Tascam recently released an update to their Tascam DR-60D audio recorder for DSLR video. Let's take a look and a listen. This entire episode was recorded with the Tascam DR-60D Mark II with various microphones so you can hear what it sounds like, but let's also talk about some of the details. Now, one of the first things I wanted to check, because it's the headline feature on the Mark II version, is how are the preamps? And we did a test here. What we did is recorded the same piece of dialogue over twice, as well as some silence, into both the Mark I and the Mark II versions of this recorder with various microphones. We compared each of the two samples from each of the two recorders with the same microphone in Audition, and what we did is we loudness normalized each of the signals so that they were at minus 24 dB, LUFS, and looked at the noise floor, the silence section, and compared the average RMS level. And what we found over time, or over the recordings, was that they either were exactly the same in terms of noise floor, or the new version was about 2 dB, maybe creeping up on 3 dB quieter in terms of noise floor. So is there a huge difference in the preamps? Well, from that standpoint, not a huge difference. But there is a new setting. So whereas before on the Mark I version, you had low, mid, and high gain settings in the menu, on the new version, you also have a high plus setting. So you have even more gain that you can use if you are working with a mic that needs even more gain. Now, to put that all into context in terms of other recorders available out there, if you've been following the channel for a while, you know that I used to record with the Tascam DR-100 Mark II, which was kind of a competitor to the Zoom H4n, and it had preamps that typically were about 3 to 6 dB noisier than what I experienced here on the DR-60D, both the Mark I and the Mark II version. So it's definitely quieter than that recorder, and it also is about the same in terms of comparing it to most of the Zoom recorders, based on the reviews I've seen and the little experience I have with those recorders. However, the Zooms tend to be better on a different aspect. While their preamps may not be as quiet and they may not have as much gain necessarily, what they do tend to excel at is they have very good battery life relative to the Tascam units here. So on the original Mark I version of the Tascam DR-60D, we were finding we had about 3 hours and 15 minutes of record time if I was phantom powering a mic or two mics and recording a 24-bit 48 kilohertz. So with the new version, I'm getting about 3.5 hours, and this is with eneloop batteries. If you're using non-rechargeable batteries, it's going to be less than that. If you're using eneloop Pro, it's going to be a little bit more than that, maybe another 30 minutes. So the Tascams don't really excel in terms of battery life, whereas the Zoom recorders do a lot better in that realm. My understanding is, for example, with the Zoom H6, you might expect battery life up to 20 hours using 4 AA rechargeables. So definitely in different leagues there, but it seems like there's a trade-off there. If you want cleaner preamps, maybe go with the Tascam. If you want better battery life, maybe go with the Zoom. So those are some things to consider. Now, because I'm almost always shooting on a tripod, one thing that I've done to help improve the overall experience and not have to swap out batteries all the time, especially if I'm doing a longer shoot, and that is to use a USB battery. That it's just a third-party battery by LifeCharge. I've got the details down below if you're interested. I spent about $40 US on this. I think the normal price is a little bit higher than that. But what you do is you just connect a USB cable from the USB battery into the Tascam. And this particular battery has been amazing in terms of battery life. I recorded approximately 25 hours, and that only got me down to about 50% battery life on this. So I could easily do an all-day shoot with this battery. The problem is, the downside, of course, is that it's pretty heavy. It's almost as heavy as the Tascam recorder itself, and it's a little awkward in terms of how to attach it. I'm just going to put it on top of my Tascam recorder using Velcro, but it is something to consider. It is an option if you need that option, and there are definitely some trade-offs. Now, build quality is exactly the same as the Mark I version of the Tascam DR-60D, if you're familiar with that. If you're not, it is a plastic body pretty much through and through. There are some metal parts. The little bars on the side are metal. The XLR inputs are metal. But beyond, the couple of the switches are metal, I think. But beyond that, it's plastic. If you drop this, there's a very good chance that the case is going to crack. So it's just not a pro build quality from that standpoint. But on the other hand, it's only $200 US. So that was the trade-off that Tascam decided to make. I don't think it's an issue. It's inexpensive enough. Now, I know I'm going to get comments now. I would consider this a fairly affordable recorder with XLR inputs and high quality audio. Relative to the pro devices, I think it certainly is inexpensive. Now, if we're talking like a sound devices recorder or mixer, like most of the pros will use, those are thousands of dollars. I think the least expensive one is somewhere around $2,000 to $2,500 US. So this is a very inexpensive recorder relative to that, but you don't get the robust build quality that you would with something like a sound devices or Zaxcom or whatever other pro devices are being used out there. Now, again, one other thing that you might want a metal body for is to help shield it from radio frequency interference, and I have not experienced that issue with the Tascam DR-60D or the Mark II, and that's going to be interference, say, from mobile phones or other electrical things that generate RF interference. So while I think it's certainly possible, and the plastic case probably doesn't do a whole lot to help shield it, I haven't really experienced those issues yet. Your mileage may vary. Now, the Mark II has the exact same safety track feature that was on the Mark I as well. I found over time I don't really use it that much. I thought it was a really neat feature when I first got the Tascam DR-60D, but over time I found I haven't really used it. As long as you do your gain staging right and you get your peaks, when someone's talking dialogue and you get your peaks up to about -12 to -15 dB, turn the limiter on. I haven't had any problems. It actually is a pretty good limiter, and we're going to talk about that more in just a second. But the safety track feature is there if you want it, and that would be something maybe I might turn on if I were doing a really, really critical shoot of some sort. Now, on the original version of the Tascam DR-60D, some people experienced an issue where they would plug an XLR connector into the recorder, and then they couldn't get that connector out. I must confess, I never experienced that issue. I have just a few cables that I use. I think 3 XLR cables that I use. I take good care of them. They're all in good working order. And I've never had an issue with it sticking. I did have one mic that had an XLR connector that if I plugged that directly into the Tascam DR-60D, the original version, Mark I, it was a little bit of a tight fit, and it took I had to twist it just slightly to get it out. So maybe that's similar to what you guys are experiencing. I noticed that XLR connector was it wasn't perfectly round. It seemed like it had been bent a little bit, and maybe that's the issue. I'm not sure. However, it looks like the XLR inputs on the new version are slightly different. The little connectors that you have to push in to release the XLR connector are shaped differently. That same mic that stuck a little bit in the original version doesn't appear to stick at all in the new version, so it looks like maybe they have attempted to address that issue. Again, I've never had any get stuck to the point where I couldn't get it out, but it looks like they may have made some changes there. When the original DR-60D came out, shortly thereafter, Robert over at JuiceLink, who makes DSLR preamplifiers, did a review that I think kind of caused some concern for some people about the DR-60D. What he did is he found, and I think he's entirely right, that the little level potentiometers, the little knobs where you can adjust the recording level of your track, is actually digital stepping. That is to say, as you turn it, it kind of drops the volume in these digital steps, as opposed to being some smooth, continuous type of effect. And the way he illustrated that was he played a continuous tone, and he turned the potentiometer down, and you could hear it stair step. Let me give you just a quick example of that. Okay, this is a quick test here to see what happens when we reduce the input setting while we are recording dialogue. And then this will be a test here with a constant tone where you will probably be able to hear the stair-stepping effect as you reduce the input level. Let's try that. Ooh. Now you'll notice in that the dialogue didn't seem as affected as a constant tone. So that is a concern, if you will. This digital stepping potentiometer that it has, and the new version has it as well, is only a concern, from my perspective, if you're recording something with more constant tones. That's going to be music and things of that nature. So this is not really made for recording music necessarily. It's more made for recording dialogue for film and video. And if you're using it for film and video dialogue, I don't see that as a really big issue. I've never had an issue with it. I've never been able to tell. Just like the original Tascam DR-60D, the new version has a limiter built into it, which works quite nicely. Now, I have used sound devices recorders in the past, and they're much more kind of a higher end recorder, and those have amazing limiters in them. And what those do is it prevents the clips when you get a really loud sound, and it just cuts them off before they clip. And good limiters will do that in a fairly subtle, non-intrusive, fairly transparent sort of way. And when I originally was recording with my Tascam DR-100 Mark II, my older recorder, before I got the DR-60D, I didn't use that limiter because I found that it was very, very imposing, and you could definitely tell when it was kicking in, and it just didn't sound good. And I was really delighted when we got the DR-60D that it sounded so much better. It was much more transparent, not quite sound devices level, but actually very usable and very good. And that same limiter is in the Mark II version. Just like on the Mark I version, you can use the DR-60D to send the audio directly to your camera, or in my case, I'm sending it directly to an Atomos Ninja recorder. It works beautifully. You have two options now. This is actually kind of interesting. There is the line out option, which the original version also had, but there's also another option to send a camera out that's a lower output level. So I'm not entirely sure. I guess you'd use that depending on the, how much your camera picks up in terms of its own gain. Normally what I would suggest is that if you're doing it, I would go out the line out or the high output into your camera's preamp, and then turn the camera preamp down till it's just one notch above off. And usually that results in the best effect. In my case, I can go out line out, which is the high output on the Tascam DR-60D Mark II, into my Atomos Ninja recorder, which accepts a line level input, and it works really, really nicely. This entire episode here was recorded that way. Overall, I would say the Tascam DR-60D Mark II is a fantastic recorder. A couple of considerations. How does it compare to the Zoom recorders, like the Zoom H5 or the Zoom H6? First of all, I think it's less expensive certainly than the Zoom H6. You'll have to compare the prices for the H5 to see where that's at this point. But those recorders, the Zooms, tend to do better in terms of battery life, whereas the Tascam recorders, the DR-60D and the DR-60D Mark II, tend to have better, cleaner preamplifiers. So it's really up to you to decide which of those is more important. In my case, I've chosen the DR-60D Mark II. I use an external battery with it, and it gets the job done very nicely for me. I do think the Zooms have a place as well. I'm not trying to say that one's better than the other. It just really kind of depends on your shooting and your priorities. Now, should you upgrade if you already have the Tascam DR-60D to the Mark II? That's a tough question. I think if you have a specific problem you're trying to solve, it may be a worthy upgrade. However, if the DR-60D is working well for you, I don't really see a need to run out there and to quickly buy the Mark II version. There are a couple things. If you have some sort of mic that really requires a lot of gain, I think you might find the Mark II really helpful. If you're trying to solve another problem like battery life, I definitely don't go. It's not going to solve that problem for you. If, on the other hand, you are in the market and you're looking for your first field recorder or an XLR-based field recorder and you don't have one already, depending on your priorities, I think the Tascam Mark II could be a really, really good choice. I think it really comes down to your priorities. If you're looking for something that's going to have really great battery life and you don't want to have to add an external battery, then the Zoom may be a better choice. If very clean preamps with a little bit more gain are your priority, I think the Tascam DR-60D Mark II is probably a better choice. You'll just need to be prepared in terms of powering that if you're going to shoot for more than about 3 hours. Go ahead and leave any questions you have down below. Glad to answer any of those. And if you haven't subscribed already, make sure you do that, and we'll get you more great videos on how to improve your lighting and sound for video. Talk with you soon.